great position, and then you have your takeaways. So now you can, like, whatever, pull up your TikTok or whatever else, and spend your time as you will. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here, right? So the first question I was going to be asked is, like, what's your pathway to this voting rights work that you do? So I was a legal aid lawyer for 33 years, okay, civil legal services for low-income people. And I started out, I had the good fortune to start out somewhat by, exercising due diligence, but somewhat just by good luck to have ended at an excellent organization, a place called Appalachian Research and Defense Fund of Kentucky. And this was a legal aid organization in Appalachian, Kentucky, that was really known for providing excellent legal services to people in rural counties in eastern Kentucky. And part of what made that organization great was it had a vision that we were there to serve the needs of the people, and we needed to make ourselves be whatever we needed to be to serve those needs. And so, like, as an example, when a young African-American man was beaten senseless for sassing, that was the word, sassing what was called the high sheriff of this county. That's what this sheriff called himself, the high sheriff of Monroe County. When that happened, we became civil rights lawyers. We didn't really know that much about civil rights law, but guess what? If people were going to be beaten by sheriffs, we were going to figure out a way to do something about it. And when a female employee in a company who worked for the rescue squad was told, girls don't drive the ambulance, okay? Those are the exact words that the county official used when this woman said she wanted to apply for the position to drive the ambulance. We became employment discrimination lawyers. We weren't employment discrimination lawyers, but somebody needed to do something about that injustice. And the third example, when an oil drilling company drilled on some neighboring land and sunk somebody's spring, basically made their water go dry, we became environmental lawyers. Not that we were environmental lawyers, but that we needed to solve a problem for somebody that involved those skills, and we figured out how to get the technical skills necessary to do that. And I was part of an organization that encouraged us to think like that, right? So getting back to the takeaways, right? Associate yourself with great organizations and great leaders, right? We had a leader that was willing and created a structure to allow us to be able to do the best work that we can. And, like, that's what's important, is thinking about what you do in the world and how you add value to the world from a construct of excellence, and how do we provide the best services. After spending time in Appalachian, Kentucky and in rural Wisconsin, I ended up running a legal aid program in Charlottesville, Virginia, the Legal Aid Justice Center in Charlottesville, Virginia, for almost 20 years. Then I ran a legal aid program in the San Francisco Bay Area Legal Aid. And what became clear to me over time is that we were really saving people's lives. We were changing people's lives for the good. We were saving people's lives by the work that we did. And we did that really in two ways. We help people with individual problems, which is, if somebody's a victim of domestic violence, we could help them escape domestic violence. But if we could find a way the system was broken to that was preventing domestic violence victims from getting relief, then fixing that systemic thing helped thousands of people. And both of those things are important. Helping that individual person who needs help now, but also fixing systems so that they work better the way they were intended. And whether it's somebody with a disability that's trying to access housing, or somebody who's homeless who's trying to access housing, or a variety of other different things, a consumer protection, a debtor in some sort of consumer protection matter, there are two levels at which we can help people, and both of those things do good. And I encourage you to look for ways that you can do both of those things. Help individual people in the ways that they're being harmed, and then actually make systems better. And that by helping individual people, we actually learn more about how to fix the systems we want to fix. And the opinions and the the opinions we have about how we're going to help different communities are actually informed by those communities, not just by our experience with those communities, but our experience working with leaders in those communities who articulate, here are the things that make a difference in our community. And so really figuring out, when you put yourself in a position like, this is the work I want to do, how do I learn the best way to do that, to realize it in the world? And what are the different methodologies that can be used? And how can I use all of the different methodologies together in a way that really help bring about change? So I did this work for 33 years. I did it in, like I say, in Wisconsin and Kentucky and Virginia and California. And I came to Arizona in 2018 to basically to do some consulting in the same kind of work. But I was very concerned about what was happening with our elections, because elections are one step removed from direct advocacy on housing or public benefits or domestic violence or any of the issues you might care about. But if the people who are actually making the decisions, if they're not fairly elected, if our system of democracy is under attack, then in fact, we need to really look at our system of democracy, because it is through our elected representatives that we get the policies that we then fight for about housing, about consumer protection, or about many other things. So that's how I got here. And I apologize for taking so long to get there. But now I'd love to chat some about the work that I do as a voting rights advocate, but it is all colored by and from the perspective of being a lifelong advocate, trying to find ways to make systems better, and then coming across Hannah Freed, who's our executive director, and All Voting is Local, and realizing that this is a pretty powerful model to do really good work that seems really timely in the United States at this point in time. And so that's how I got here.
Thank you so much. That's a great entry point into the work. I wonder if you could talk a little more about your work here in Arizona. I know that the Carter Center, named for Jimmy Carter, former president of the United States, which has been doing democracy and election protection work in emerging democracies around the world for decades, has recently decided that they need to do some work here in Arizona, that we are a state that needs to have its democracy protected as well. So I'm curious what All Voting is Local is focusing on, and what is the nature, the extent of the problem that you think that you can help fix?
Great, thanks. Wow, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The situation needs attention. It needs all of us to pay attention to it, because what's happened is we have had for a long time a bipartisan and balanced system for electing people to government. I don't know if you've ever heard the folks from the Maricopa County Elections Office talk about their work. Maybe not. If you haven't, I'll give you an opportunity to do that next week before we close today. But election systems are just that. They're systems. They're very complex, and they're actually very thoughtful systems that have been developed over many years in a bipartisan nature to get a fair result of elections. And unfortunately, the getting of a fair result is what's under attack, okay? There is now a new effort by losing campaigns to realize that they can, so.
No.
I'm sure that he will come back.
No.
In the meantime,
Yeah.
I can tell you that we have an election coming up in November. So if you're eligible to register to vote, the deadline to register to vote is October 11th. Early voting starts October 12th, and the election itself is November 8th.
I think I'm back. somehow temporarily changed to just a participant rather than a panelist, but I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Alex.
Great, no worries. Technology is its way. But the whole point is that, you know, if you ran for something and lost, your campaign committee ended, right? It's like you raised what money you raised, but it was done. And now some people have realized, guess what? I can keep raising money on this campaign forever if I just chum the waters with propaganda enough. And that's really what's happening, is that there is now a financial incentive on the part of losing campaigns to not accept defeat and to keep fundraising on their losing campaign. So they were fundraising to win their campaign, but they keep fundraising after they lose their campaign because it's big business. It's lucrative, actually. I can make more money raising money for my losing campaign than I can actually doing something productive. And having created a system like that, because there are no controls on the way we raise money around campaign finance, we are in a difficult position. The fact that the Carter Center thinks that they need to be doing work in Arizona is itself a testament to the fact that we're not in a great place. What we do and have been doing since we started in 2018, when I became part of All Voting is Local and helped establish a chapter here in Arizona, is to really develop relationships with election officials about the mechanics of election administration. How do we actually conduct our elections? How do we make sure that they're done fairly and securely? And how do we actually include as many eligible people as we can? And so, there is no disjunct between having secure elections and having accessible elections. We can do both of those things, and we should do both of those things. Every eligible voter should be able to vote easily and freely. And we should not put undue restrictions on people's ability to vote and the ways that they vote. Because guess what? People live different lives. Some people can go to a polling place on a Tuesday, on the first or second Tuesday of a particular month and vote in the middle of the day, but not everybody can, okay? And Arizona was a front runner. Every person in the Arizona legislature was elected with a majority of vote by mail votes, because 80% of people vote by mail in Arizona, right? So we had an unprecedented attack on mail-in ballots. It continues today, but it's disingenuous in Arizona because we have been electing our leaders by a safe and secure system of mail-in voting for 20 years, okay? And everybody in our legislature, if you look at their votes and how they were cast, more than a majority came from mail-in ballots, because 80% of the votes come from mail-in ballots, right? So everybody was elected with mail-in ballots. If we threw out all the mail-in ballots in history, nobody would have ever been elected to the legislature, and they wouldn't be there now, right? And so, the fact that there was political expediency in 2020 to try and undermine mail voting was a political and propaganda issue and not really a factual issue. And the fact that happened and continues to happen, look at, and again, there are moderate people on both sides of the aisle who speak out against what is happening in response to our democracy. Look at if next week, Recorder Richer from Maricopa County, he's a very conservative Republican, okay? But he actually believes that what's happening to our elections is damaging. It's bad. It undermines faith in democracy. It's harmful, and it should not continue to be propagated. And the fact that losing campaigns have now, in the primaries this year in Arizona, there were a number of candidates who said, long before people even started voting, we really don't know whether we should trust the results until we see if we won. And most of those people who said that actually won their primaries, so then they didn't have to challenge the election system. But that's the way it is now, is that anybody who loses wants to be able to continue to raise money for their campaign. There are ways that there are real election disputes, okay, about certain minor things, and they're dealt with, and there are recounts if elections are close. There are other ways where if there are particular things that you believe are illegal, you can challenge them in court, and a court can make a determination as to how to correct that problem. But once all of those things are exhausted, the election's over. Somebody was elected, and if you lost, you lost. And getting more people to just admit that they lost their elections when they did is one step in the process. The other thing is getting voters to understand that campaigns have a financial interest in continuing their campaigns after they've lost, and to just recognize that. There's a huge financial interest in continuing to campaign on a losing campaign, and to just put that in your calculus as you're thinking through what is all this information I'm hearing about voting, because we've done real harm to the enterprise of voting. And again, if you come to the webinar next week that I'll tell you about, like, every step has bipartisan cross checks, right? Like, people go to drop boxes, both a Republican and Democrat go out to the drop boxes and they pick up the ballots, right? We do signature verifications in teams that are bipartisan teams. All of the critical actions that could impact whether votes get counted or not are conducted with both parties having representatives to participate in those activities, so that we have those cross checks. And those cross checks have been in place forever, right? That's how our system was designed. And now there are a small group of people who are trying to undermine that system because they want to keep fundraising on losing campaigns. I'll stop there.
Sure, that's a good entree, I think, for us to ask. You've talked about creating relationships with various election officials, and we know that elections are generally driven by counties and then the state. So what else might your organization be doing to help enable as many people to vote as possible in Arizona? That's part one. And if you don't mind, part two is, what is the extent of access or lack of access to voting? I know that, interestingly enough, ASU has a pretty high voting rate compared to other college students across the country, but it's still lower than people who are typically older than college students. So who has access to voting and who doesn't? Who's most affected by the work that you're doing? So how are you doing your work and who's most affected by it?
Right. So, there are a number of ways that we do the work we do. Part of it is just relationship building with election officials to talk about best practices. And so we had, a listening tour with election officials last year. Some of them were actually, meetings, but things were still very COVID-y. There was a lot of email exchanges that were really directed towards saying, hey, here, this county has adopted this best practice that allows access to voting, is still safe and secure. Would your county consider doing it, right? And there are a bunch of ways, and again, election officials do this some amongst themselves, but we actually have resources to actually focus on it. Let's identify some best practices and try and replicate them across the state. That's like one example. Another thing is there's an election procedures manual that basically is the regulatory construct that determines many of the processes and procedures that election officials use to comply with the law. It's the regulations, if you will, in Arizona for voting, for elections. And we had a big campaign to basically make comments on the election procedures manual about, here's a way you can increase access to voting for individuals with disabilities that, in a way that's still safe and secure, blah, blah, blah. And we made hundreds and hundreds of comments on the election procedures manual to try and have that policy document reflect best practices. So one is meeting and greeting and talking and trying to get people to voluntarily accept best practices. The second is trying to codify best practices through things like the election procedures manual, and also working with the Secretary of State's office on training and other things with county officials to try and make sure that the best practices are pushed out. So I think that's the way we've been doing it. I forgot part two. What was part two?
Part two is asking you to comment on how many people are affected and or call it types or communities of people who are most affected by being pushed out of voting, not accessible voting, not getting access to the voting booth?
Yes. So, you know, some states limit voting to people with driver's licenses. Does anybody see the problem with that? Only Arizona driver's licenses. Anybody see a problem with limiting voting in Arizona to only people with Arizona driver's licenses?
There are a lot of people nodding their heads.
Yeah, okay, because students, right, are the biggest single group of people who may in fact have a legal and valid right to vote in Arizona, but may choose to still maintain a driver's license in their home state. That's one example. Snowbirds are another, right? So it's not just young people, it's also older people. That's another subset of people that we have many of in Arizona that might have basically dual lives. And you have a right to determine your domicile for voting purposes, but that doesn't mean you have to have your driver's license there. And there are also, though, poor people. Okay, people who don't own a car. Guess what? If you don't own a car and your mother doesn't own a car, you might not have a driver's license, right? If you live in a rural area, tribal communities, specifically car ownership, is a fraction of what it is in other parts of the state. And so if you pass a seemingly neutral rule that you have to have a driver's license to be able to vote, it actually isn't neutral at all, because it has a disproportionate impact on communities that don't have access to resources. It takes for granted that white middle class people own cars at a higher rate than other people do, and it actually builds that into who gets to vote, and that is improper. That is not the way we want to go. And so saying that the only way we can securely vote is if you have an Arizona driver's license is by definition to exclude a whole subset of people who are in fact eligible to vote and should be eligible to vote, and we shouldn't exclude through this mechanism. And there actually will be a ballot initiative on the ballot this fall that will in fact ask you to support adding driver's license numbers to mail-in ballots. And that's the reason that's bad policy, is because there are a whole group of people that will exclude. And even if there are alternatives like, well, you can put your voter registration number. Everyone in the room, and I know how many people are going to raise their hands, 0. How many people in the room know your voter registration number or could find it in the next 2 minutes?
It's a big 0.
Okay, right. You don't. No one knows that. So saying, oh, we're going to create an alternative for people, you know, everyone put their driver's license on, but if not, you can put your voter registration number on and some other pieces of arcane information. That is not a fair, equalized way to allow people to vote. And so it's an example of something that seems neutral that isn't neutral. Just like we look every year, where are polling places located? What are the drive times to the polling places? What are the wait times at the polling places? We actually do a pretty good job in Arizona of making voting fairly accessible, but you've seen the pictures in Milwaukee County, in Detroit, in other places where you have predominantly communities of color that are severely under-resourced in terms of their election infrastructure, such that people in those communities have to wait hours and hours in line. Okay, as part of what we do, every time the polling places are discussed, every time they're located, one of the first things we do is do a drive time analysis. How long does it take for people to get to those polling places? And are they fairly and equitably distributed in the community? And they are, but they are in part because we keep track of it and we're paying attention to it and we're holding people accountable to that. And you can't then slip into a system where there's a disparate impact that no one is paying attention to. Lots of disparate impacts may not be intentional discrimination, but you slip into patterns of whatever. You know the people you know, you favor the people you favor. Yeah, that church needs one, and yeah, that community group needs one, and that community center, and that senior center needs a voting location. And pretty soon, there aren't enough to put in that church and that community center that you don't really know because they're not in your circle. And part of what we want to do is use data to basically hold public officials accountable to make sure that the system is fair and accessible. And that's a really good example. Polling place locations, wait times for voting. I mean, we've actually done a great thing in Arizona in terms of moving toward vote centers, right? That's another, another thing that somehow now we're trying to eliminate because they're bad because more people vote. I don't know. I don't get it. Again, I don't have the fascism gene, but the use, the use of policies to basically prevent people from getting access to voting is harmful, and it doesn't actually serve any legitimate purpose, right? But it can seem neutral, or sometimes they're presented as facially neutral, but they have a disparate impact, and we have a duty to try and find and see and identify and mitigate those impacts.
Alex, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the law that just passed in the spring session of the state legislature. It was House Bill 2492, and it was signed into law by Governor Ducey this spring. And it seems like it does bring up some complications, perhaps raising some issues of accessibility to elections. I'm curious if you could tell us anything about that law, and then help us understand why a ballot measure called Arizona Free and Fair Elections Act did not make it. We will not see it in the November election. We will not be able to consider it.
Okay, I'll start with HB 2492. Probably the single worst bill that was passed by the Arizona legislature this last session, at least as regards to voting. There were some other bad ones as regards other topics, but as regards voting, it's one of the worst. It's clearly illegal under federal law, but we don't care because we want to challenge the federal law. That's one of the reasons. Second, it solves a problem, which is actually not really a problem, that impacts actually a very few number of people. There are a few number of people. So under federal law, all you need to do is swear that you are a US citizen to be able to be registered to vote. That's all the federal government requires, and that's the way it operates in many states. Arizona, in fact, created a required documented proof of citizenship requirement, and that's a conflict between federal law and state law. And after a court case that went up and down or did its thing, it was determined that Arizona could do that in limited circumstances for Arizona only elections, but that in fact for federal elections, Arizona could not control the way the federal government thought that the elections would be conducted. And so we have a system where some people are quote unquote federal only voters, okay? They're only people that have attested their citizenship and have not provided documented proof of citizenship. It's actually a very small number of people, okay? But what we did is we passed a bill that now targets every naturalized citizen, anyone who was ever not a citizen, who has become a citizen, now has a giant target on their back to be targeted for excess scrutiny to determine whether or not they should be eligible to vote, okay? And it's a horrible bill in its documented proof of citizenship requirements. It's illegal under federal law. Hopefully it will be struck down, but it also includes a new provision that not that many people have talked about, which is called a documented proof of residence. And so when you go to register to vote now, so when you go to register to vote, you're going to also have to provide documented proof of residence, and that is that you live where you live, right? And it's easy to do that if you have an Arizona driver's license or state issued ID. So ASU, fall semester, people with tables all up and down, the sidewalks, register to vote, right? Get registered to vote. But when this law goes into effect, if you do not have an Arizona driver's license, not only will the people who have to be there with a table, they'll have to collect documented proof of your residence. So you will have to have with you a documented, some sort of proof of where you live, which could be under Arizona law, your utility bill, a bank statement, or other things like that. And you can provide those things electronically, but you have to actually give a copy to the people who at the table who are trying to register you, which is not that easy. Actually, it's going to be a big problem. And so again, this new requirement will affect voter registration for snowbirds, students, any of those classes of people, low-income people, people who live on tribal lands, people who don't have a driver's license or Arizona issued ID. So just one other inequity, just because, like, guess what? When they like layer them on, you can't just let them go without calling them out. So our online voter registration system is only available to people who have a driver's license or Arizona issued ID. So we've already created a disparity because online registration, making it easy to register, is only eligible to the class of people who have driver's licenses, right? So then we used paper, community-based voter registration drives to basically equalize that inequity. And now we've actually coded that same inequity into the paper form, because if you don't put a driver's license number on the paper form now, you will have to collect and make copies of documented proof of residence to be able to register someone to vote, which, at least as people are looking at it now, is actually probably not possible unless you have like a photocopier and a variety of other things. And most people won't have the documentation they need to actually register to vote at the flea market or walking down the sidewalk at ASU or anywhere else, or in the grocery store parking lot, because that's how we register those people to vote who otherwise are hard to register to vote, who we've already made it hard because they can't access the online system. So it's a bad bill. It is being challenged. Provisions of it may be struck down. It doesn't go into effect until January. And so hopefully by then we will know whether or not all of these things come to be, but at least some of them probably will, and they do real damage to access to voting for that subset of people who don't have a driver's license.
You know, Alec,
and that has a disparate impact.
It's funny that you say it doesn't go into effect until January, meaning after the midterm elections on November 8th. Is that right?
It was a compromise that was reached in the legislature. We actually thought we had the votes to kill it, and somehow it then snuck by after they said they would delay the effective date.
Interestingly, there are people who are campaigning out there. And by campaigning, I mean they're doing public education that is inaccurate. A colleague of mine just a couple weeks ago was encountered someone at a public place, and she was told that regardless of how you became a citizen or are a citizen, that you'd have to re-register. So there's already a fear campaign being promulgated out there, a misinformation campaign, and it could be chilling, even though the law itself isn't in effect. So that's one issue. I imagine that there is other kinds of intimidation that goes on that prevents some people who are otherwise eligible from accessing elections. Do you have any experience with that at all?
So I'll just mention a related bill, which is HB 2243, which had been HB 1617 that the governor vetoed because it was horrible. And then with like the tiniest, semicolon change, again, I'm being hyperbolic, but that's about all that changed. It was at the very last minute as part of the budget deal. It was passed through. 2242 basically allows any person to raise with an election official a suspicion that someone is not a US citizen, and that creates a duty on the part of the election official to investigate. And there, again, this is probably going to be challenged. raises questions about different election officials might interpret that differently, but there will definitely be some election officials that will use that. Any anonymous complaints that someone's not a US citizen to basically go out on a witch hunt, if you will. And it's going to be, that new provision will be used, it will be used to target naturalized citizens who have become naturalized, who are now eligible to vote and registered to vote. This will be used to target them, to chill them, and in fact requires that if they allows them to make a referral for a criminal investigation. And so it's like with very little hearsay, someone could have an investigator coming to their door about whether they're really eligible to vote or not, and talk about chilling a new citizen's interest in participating in our democracy. It is designed to chill people's interest participating in our democracy.
It's a little hard to hear this. We can know it, but to hear it from someone who's on the ground doing the work, it's really tough. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is how you sustain yourself doing the work. You've been working in legal aid for decades. You've been working with people who are most marginalized in our society, trying to get them the help they need to resolve individual problems or reform systems. How do you sustain your own hope? What works for you? So tell us, as someone who's seeking justice, what we might be able to learn from someone who's still in the game.
Take time to celebrate the victories, right? Every week has something that you worked on that went well, and you know, recognize it. Thank people for it. Just spend a little bit of your life energy like seeing the progress rather than denying it. Sometimes it actually like serves our interest, you know, like whatever, it motivates us to like be bleak and dark, or sometimes we just like go into that spiral. But guess what? There are actually little victories every day. And, you know, whatever it is, you know, instead of seeing it as a glass half empty, you see it as a glass half full. Is, you know, make an effort to validate those wins and to take them for what they are. They're not everything we wanted. They're not 100%. Yeah, all student loans aren't forgiven, but maybe we've made some progress, right? Whatever it is, the issue that you care about, seeing the incremental progress we make, because yeah, we want to see radical progress sometimes because we're so far from where we want to be, but actually most things change incrementally. And actually appreciating the fact that incremental change can be valuable. That does not mean to diminish a desire for bigger, faster, better change. But one way you sustain yourself every week is to see what things actually went well and made a difference in people's lives, right? Like that's part of it. It's like, we did so many domestic violence, you know, protection orders when I was at legal aid. You could become numb to the fact that we got 50 domestic violence restraining orders this week. It's like, that could be 50 lives saved, right? We sometimes diminish the value of what we do and don't really see the value of it. And even in the voting rights work, looking at like, wow, we got this county, this best practice that one county does to be adopted in other counties. Just look at vote centers. So we've been, you know, counties that move to vote centers solve a problem that Arizona has that is, it's an outlier. And that is, if you vote in the wrong precinct, your vote will not be counted. Okay, it's called out of precinct voting. It was part of a US Supreme Court case last year that had been going up for like 5 years. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided that, you know, some discrimination wasn't enough discrimination. It has a disparate impact. And one way to solve that is vote centers. A county that moves to vote centers automatically does away with the out of precinct voting issue. In Maricopa County, 12,000 valid votes were thrown away in 2018 because of out of precinct ballots. And in this election, it was less than 2,000. Okay, so that means like, even though more, 10,000 less people were disenfranchised because of this technicality, because vote centers allow for a way to correct this problem. Because at a vote center, they can print all of the valid ballot forms and you vote the right ballot form, no matter which place you go to. Whereas in precinct-based voting, if you go to a precinct, they only have the ballot forms for people who live in that area. And if you don't live in that area and you vote one of those ballots, you voted for the wrong school board or the wrong constable, even though you voted for the right presidential election and senatorial election. And most of the elections, you maybe didn't vote for the right, constable or other minor official that's in the smallest geographic district, and we're going to throw your whole ballot out. Most states do what's called count the up ballot races. They'd counted your vote for president and for senator and your state representative and all of the ones you were in the right jurisdiction for, and just discounted that constable or that school board ballot. But we didn't do that in Arizona. So we could change our rules as to how we count out of precinct ballots, or we can move to vote centers. Many Arizona jurisdictions have moved to vote centers, and that's one of the advantages they have. And in Maricopa County, for example, that saved 10,000 valid votes between I think the primary in 2018 and the primary in 2020.
That's a great win to celebrate. Something that's concrete, tangible, that really changes people's access to voting, especially for those of us who might live in one precinct and work in another, trying to figure out how I'm going to get to the poll, the voting area on time and not miss my deadlines or miss my class. We don't yet have a holiday, a voting day. We do still have work and school and everything else on our day for voting. We do have early voting though. So if people are registered, if they go to if they go to arizona.vote, you can check your registration and register if you're eligible. So besides doing that for yourself, one of the questions that we have for you is, how can people get involved in ensuring that people who have ensuring people's access to vote? What sorts of things that you recommend, whether it's your own or other organizations or other resources? What can people do? One of the things that might be attainable in the short term is volunteering at a poll or being paid to be a poll worker. That's one small idea. So I'm just curious, from your insider view, what can people do to get involved?
So I was gonna actually throw this in the chat, and I realized I don't think there is not an all chat, is there?
No, it's just Q&A.
It's
Just Q&A, yeah.
Just Q&A. So I have some URLs. How can I make those easily available to folks?
You can send them to me and we will circulate them.
Okay, so one thing, we have a democracy pledge, right? Take a look at it. I think it has, in fact, solid principles about protecting our democracy. Sign it. And then there's a get involved page that, in fact, has things you can do if you care about democracy and want to get involved. And those aren't just from All Voting is Local. Those are from a bunch of organizations that work on voting rights policy. It's democracypledgeaz.com, and I'll send it. Second thing is Monday. On Monday, Recorder Richer and Elections Director Jarrett from Maricopa County are going to be participating in a webinar we're hosting called Keep Trusting the Process, the discussion with Maricopa County election officials. And they're actually going to talk about why our elections are safe and secure, and whatever. They are people who come from a different political persuasion than I do, but we are all completely aligned on, in fact, we need to actually have fair and accessible elections, and here's how we can do that. And they have a lot to say about that, and there's a Zoom link to sign up for that. Third thing is you can sign up for election protection. If you have time and want to participate in nonpartisan election protection, we are part of a coalition that you can sign up and basically get trained and be able to stand at a polling place on election day or during early voting and provide guidance to voters who are having issues. Let them know that there's help available We have lawyers and other people who are on call. We have people in the command center. And so you won't be alone. You'll have a support network that's supporting you, but you can sign up for nonpartisan election protection. And then the last thing is we actually host a fellowship every semester. Our fall fellowship is filled, but I can give you the email address for my colleague, Amanda Lugo, who coordinates that. And the nice thing about it is it's a paid fellowship that allows students that want to get more involved in sort of like the nuts and bolts of how the democracy process works, can do a 6 or 8 week fellowship to really sort of get immersed in that and do a project related to that, and get some compensation for doing that. And so those are the 4 ways I would say to get involved, and I will get them to you so you can get them out today if you can, just because at least the one, sign up for the thing with Stephen Richer. He's a great guy, and I think we'll have a spirited conversation about why our elections are safe and how to make them better.
Thank you so much. We actually have a student here who's doing some work around voting access. And I wonder, Yalen, would you like to talk about what you're doing here on campus and off campus?
Sure. So not really. So I work for the Mark Kelly campaign and the Arizona Democratic Party, and I actually do have the capacity to register voters even if you're an out-of-state student. Right now, I do have the form, so I can always bring them to class if you guys would like or are interested or need them. I am able to provide guidance on if you're in-state as well and you need support on that too. And then other than that, I'm involved with Mission for Arizona, which is a club on campus and just in general an organization. And we are trying to register as many students. We don't care about party affiliation. We're not picky. We just want you guys to be involved in current democracy and have your voices heard. So if you're here, there is a polling location on campus and it'll be in the SDFC on November. But yeah, we have club meetings on Thursdays. If you want to get involved, volunteer. We also offer paid internships. We offer lead positions, which you can use as volunteer hours. It's a great way to meet people, a great way to get involved in your local politics. We offer a lot of educational resources as well. So yeah.
Well, how wonderful is that? I didn't care. I didn't know she was going to be sitting at my table. So thank you so much. There may be other questions as well in the room. We have capacity to field questions in the Q&A chat elsewhere. But for those of you who are in the room today, what questions do you have? What comments do you have about what's going on with elections and voting in Arizona? No question or comment too small. Yes, please.
I guess I was just gonna ask his opinion of, there was an article I saw week over the weekend that basically said there was an election official that was caught tampering with the machines. I don't know how it was phrased, but they were caught tampering with the machines and stuff. I don't remember where it was. I mean, in the US, but during the 2020 election. So I guess just thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so, there are improper and illegal things that happen at a relatively low level sometimes, okay? They are not generally indicative of a system that's broken at all, okay? The system is not broken, it works. And in fact, the fact that that person has been caught shows something about the fact that the system works, because they got caught doing whatever it was that they were trying to do. We had a review of the Arizona election that took most of 2021 and essentially yielded no results, okay? It essentially, the results that were determined by the cyber ninjas were within the margin of error, the same exact results that came from Maricopa County. After months and months and months and millions of dollars and raising millions of dollars on propaganda, the outcome was the same. And every one of the essential elements of here's why our elections are flawed was debunked, okay? And hasn't changed the fact we actually do live in a world where some people don't believe in factual information or data, and they only believe in propaganda and conspiracy theories and lies because they're fed that and they feed on that. And guess what? That's a choice, people. You can choose to read whatever conspiracy theories you want to, but then you will in fact no longer be connected to the world of people in factual reality. And even though factual reality is having some challenges in the current present, because never before have we been faced with having it challenged that's so broadly on such a high level, guess what? Data and facts will win. Okay, they will control the day. And do you want to be on the side, of data and facts and winning, or do you want to be on the side of conspiracy theories and lies and propaganda? And it's not just a binary, but there's a lot of binary. Okay, there are a lot of people who are choosing to not consume good information from good sources that they can validate because it fits some sort of narrative they want to have, but actually that's a bad way to live. Okay, you're deluding yourself, and it's an unhealthy way to live. And before we run out of time, I just want to mention the 4 things: be passionate about something, develop the skills you need to be an asset, associate yourself with great organizations, and go the extra mile. Those are your 4 takeaways.
So grateful for your work today with us, Alex, to help us understand how elections work, what's at stake, and how we can get involved, given the existing laws and the kinds of collective actions that are available through organizations like your own, All Voting is Local, and all members of the coalition that you're referencing. I can tell you that as someone who's volunteered through election protection, that it's actually really fun. I'm not sure if I've ever felt more patriotic in my life, standing at some of these polling places all around the county. Most recently, I was here actually near the ASU campus, where so many students were being turned away because they didn't have the right documents to demonstrate their own residence. And we actually did have printers with us physically to try to get people to be able to print out part of their My ASU account to show them that they were in this dorm on that street, so they could walk in to that polling place and not register, but actually, convey their vote. So we do think that every vote matters, regardless of your party affiliation or your lack of party affiliation. And so we're really, really glad that we have a student here who's doing that work for other ASU students. Are there other questions that have come up? Yeah.
My question is, are these props being put forward? And if we could stop voter retention and adequately have people voting, what would then be the Arizona agenda? Like, if we were to figure out this voting system, what would the Arizona agenda move to? So why are they happening, and how would we move forward from these voter discrimination laws?
So I think I understood the question is, if we got rid of the laws that had disproportionate effects in discriminatory ways, what could we imagine? What could we actually have our state be if we could what could we get done here? Okay. Alex, did you want to address any of that?
Yeah, I would, again, representative government is, you elect people who have your values, and maybe nothing would change. But my guess is, in fact, that if people elect people that have values that are the same as theirs, that look like them and think like them, then in fact, many things could change, right? And right now, there's just no doubt about it. Money controls our politics. And the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, I don't remember how many years ago now it's been, but it's been about 10-ish or something, has done real damage, because right now it's just the richest people get to decide what policy is, or get to elect the people who decide what policy is. Just think about if a community that cared about the environment could actually elect people who would stand up for that. If people who cared about global climate change could actually elect people who stood up for that, and we could elect more of those voices, it would change the dynamic. The Arizona legislature, just between Republicans and Democrats, is separated by a vote or two in each chamber. right? 2 votes in one chamber, 1 vote in the air chamber. Okay, and in fact, again, not partisan, but in fact, it might be different values, and different values might be pushed forward. And part of the question is not having the right to elect people that reflect your community means people are less invested in our democracy. If only rich white men have power, then other people don't respect that power necessarily, because it's not power that actually is representative. And if we make our power and our government more representative, we in fact get better buy-in to the hard decisions that government makes. Government can never make everyone happy, but they can actually be representative of the will of the people if we actually allow people to get elected that reflect the will of the people. And that means making sure every eligible person has an accessible and easy way to cast their ballot.
Well, Alex, I don't think we can think of a better way of ending this conversation, although we just want to say that it's the middle of the conversation that we can all continue with. And there is one last question. We're going to have a point of prerogative of our faculty member here, Professor Holman.
Hey, thank you so much, Alex. I personally just want to thank you for coming today and participating and giving us this, not just information, but I actually feel a little inspired. I think it's scary to think that we're so proud of our democracy, yet it feels so under siege, especially the last several years. My question is, what would you recommend, not just for students, but since this is my wheelhouse here, what would you recommend for folks who don't feel strongly about, say, quote unquote, either candidates? We have this very sort of staunch 2-party system here in the US, and you just aren't jazzed about that one, but you really don't like this one. One, I guess my question is, what effect does it have if you just don't vote in certain things? And what do you think, what is your suggestions for how to tease that out? Because we have so much pressure to vote, but if you really don't fall strongly on an issue from a voter expert standpoint, what do you recommend?
So again, we're nonpartisan, but in fact, parties stand for different things, right? And even if 2 people are close, then what platform are you voting for if you're not voting for the person? So that would be the first point I would want to make. Second point I would want to make is, if you haven't read it, there's a great article by Ibrahim X. Kendi, Kendi, called The Other Swing Voter. It's in the Atlantic. And it talks about how young people and people of color who don't vote are the greatest single swing voting bloc in the country, not white moderate people in the middle. And unfortunately, our politics is usually driven by how to attract quote unquote swing voters, and that gets reduced oftentimes to how to make policies more palatable to the white middle class voter. And in fact, Professor X. Kendi's article says, no, there's actually this whole other block of people who just choose not to vote. And so don't be part of the other swing voters, or be part, you recognize you are part of the other swing voters. You're making a choice when you don't vote, and it means that some other people will get elected, and you're giving up your chance to have a say, and actually your say matters. Even if you think it's kind of close and it really doesn't matter, it does matter. Sometimes people in legislatures vote in caucuses. They vote just because they're D's or R's, because their caucus told them to do this or to do that. And when they don't know, they oftentimes vote in caucuses. So which caucus that you're going to be supporting better reflects your values, and you should take that into consideration when you decide whether you're going to bother to cast a ballot. My advice is cast a ballot, vote on everything on the ballot, and take the time to educate yourself to make a good choice. The ballot initiatives, there's a ton of complicated things. I didn't ever answer your question about why fair elections didn't get on. It's because we're making it harder to do initiatives. We're making it harder to get initiatives on the ballot, and that's why it didn't get on. Tens of thousands of signatures were thrown out because the circulator that circulated the sheet at the top of the thing where they put the name and address of the committee that's collecting the signatures left off the suite number. And that in fact made tens of thousands of signatures be thrown away in whole cloth, and they were only 1,500 signatures short for the Fair Elections Initiative. So my answer is care about everything and take the time to educate yourself, because we actually have a democracy to protect, and it is under attack in a way, and that is not hyperbolic. It is under attack. There are people who want to make our elections meaningless so that powerful, rich people can decide who rules us. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I am not comfortable with that.
Thank you. Again, just excellent to say thank you. We have a quick announcement after we give them a round of applause for that passionate, meaningful sharing of his expertise. That this is the first of 3 talks in the Seeking Justice in Arizona series. The next 2 coming up right here, same bat channel, will be September 19th, Caroline Isaacs from Just Communities Arizona, thinking about what does safety look like outside the punishment system. And then September 28th, we will have Dr. Deshawn Taylor coming to speak to us from the Desert Star Institute for Family Planning to address issues around reproductive justice. So timely, all pointing to ways that we can get involved collectively to be powerful in the way that we already are. Okay, have a great day. Thank you very much.